So you're back with us. I need to look at the time. Got to pick kids up. I've got an hour 20, that's fine. So this was supposed to be, so we're looking at the 7 stages of marriage. We're starting in part 1 to look at the key 4 that I mentioned in the New Testament. And we started with the 7th stage, and we didn't make that into one part. So it's become 2. So we looked at that one part in part 1.1 and then part 1.2. We are now looking at the other 3 of the 4, the 7 stages. So this is it. This is the second stage we're going to discuss. So if you would have seen that video, I hope you begin to realise where we're going with this in terms of understanding. So Matthew 26, 27, 29. So if you want to stop and read that, pause the video, but it's just Jesus saying about drinking a cup. So the point that's relevant is blah blah. I don't mean to say blah blah. I'm just trying to quicken the video. This is the blood of the covenant poured out for forgiveness of sins. So Jesus is telling you what that cup is. I tell you, I will never again drink of this fruit or the vine, have a cup of wine, until the day I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. So we wouldn't realise that that's like one of the critical verses in church theology and understanding the revelation of who Jesus is and what he did for us. So the point is, we would never understand that's part of the wedding as well. So what is it? What's it alluding to? What is Jesus saying? Again, Jesus isn't talking about a wedding, he's talking about his wedding. So he will drink the cup with them, and never again will they drink it together until they drink it anew in his Father's kingdom. So there are actually 4 cups of wine. So Jesus uses the term, or it's quoted him saying, fruit of the vineyard or the vine, but basically wine. So 4 cups. So that actually, this is a new idea that we're not going to elaborate on, but we're going to elaborate on further. So the idea is now morphing into something else. So the idea is like the Jewish wedding exactly points to Jesus about who he is, what he did, why he did it, and why he's coming back again to fulfill. But also the 7 Jewish festivals do the same thing. So we've now got a second overlap. So these 4 cups actually are both in the wedding ceremony and at Passover, which we'll go into later. Passover we'll discuss at further points when we get to that. So we're just sticking to the 4. So this is just introducing something new without covering it fully, but we will cover it fully. It also it's OT, but not New Testament. So if you completely flip a switch, there's no Old and New Testament. There's just one Bible, and it is one. It's perfect. It's like looking in a mirror, basically. When you look in the mirror of the New Testament, you see the Old Testament. When you look in the mirror of the Old Testament, you see the New, and they match perfectly. So in ceremony, this is a cup of wine. So we're going to look at wine. So just label on the point, what does wine symbolize in the Bible? Why do we drink wine? So wine is blood, symbolically through scripture, and relates to sacrifice. Also relates to union. So blood reunifies, makes whole that which is broken. So this idea that 2 will become one flesh. So it's not strange that you find in a wedding ceremony you drink wine. Actually, I don't think it's something we do at all. And if we do it, we're doing communion, which is the same thing. We're celebrating the same thing. We just don't realise it. It's a celebration, but not. So really, it's a remembrance. So ceremony celebrates something, but in remembrance. So where the Jewish festivals come in prophetically, they are remembering something forwards, not backwards. Now, in the human paradigm, you can't understand remembering things forward is not possible. But this is what the Bible does. It prophetically talks about what Jesus will do. So wine is both the first fruits, best fruits, fruit of the vine. So Song of Songs 1 to 2, to paraphrase, this is the greatest song, your love is better than wine. Okay. So the song that's greatest is referring to itself, the Song of Songs, and the best fruits in that we can experience as human beings, both practically and metaphysically or metaphorically, is wine. Actually, the point is God's love is better than wine. So Jesus' love for his bride is better than wine. So the process of producing wine is treading, crushing the grapes. So we discussed this earlier. We buy wine. Earlier, in the first video, we were talking about the parable of the 10 virgins, the wise and foolish, and that they had to. The difference is critically who buys oil and who doesn't. So what does buy oil mean? So another theological example of buying oil is the process of producing wine, which is treading up, crushing of the grapes. What the Bible's speaking about metaphorically when it talks about the crushing of the grapes is simply the word Bible's trials and tribulations. So in wine we get this nice fruit, but we get it because of the trials and tribulations we go through. In my understanding, we have no concept of this biblically. That to grow, we first need to suffer. And actually, it's the example on the cross. So the analogy works throughout the Bible. This is why we understand these things, because they're repeated time and time again throughout the Bible. The Bible uses different language, different imagery, but they all basically sum up to the same thing. So Jesus is the grape that was crushed on the cross. So the crushing or treading of the grape event is the cross, and the product of the cross is the wine. That's why we drink wine we do communion. It's also the same process we drink when we celebrate a marriage. So the Hebrew word for fruits is actually parah. So it's in the word in the Hebrew. It's the word heart. So Hebrew works a little differently to how we would expect a normal language to work. So the vowels, generally speaking, are spoken but not written. So parah, you'd write it P-R-H or pay-esh, hey. This is something else. There are 3 Hebrew languages, or alphabets. The original one was pictures. So ha, which is the resh and the hey in parah, means mountain. And it's because as they walked around, the thing they would see is the mountain. So it's literally behold the stars is what it means. So they would find where they were going because they could see the mountain and go, I know I live close to that mountain, or I know where I'm going to is close to that mountain, or the opposite, the negative of that, I know where I don't want to go to is anywhere near that mountain, so I'm going to walk away from it. The pay added to pay resh hay or put in parah means mouth. So it's it's talking, but it's not just talking, it's practical action. So the practical action of beginning to behold something is a fruit. So you either will understand that or not, but we won't labour on that. But it's just kind of ironic. So it's covenantal as well. So wine symbolises blood, it symbolises union, it's a celebration, but remembrance. It's both related to fruits, first fruits and best fruits, related to parah, and it's a covenant. So it's those 5 things it symbolises. So there are actually 3 cups in the actual ceremony. So when Jesus says, I will never again drink of this fruit of the vine until the day when I drink it, you in my Father's kingdom, refers to two of those three cups. So they're distinct cups. We know he's alluding to the two of the four cups, or two of the three cups in the ceremony. We'll go over what the other two are. So there's four cups, there's three practical cups where they actually practically celebrate by drinking wine. Again, that symbolism has to be perpetual throughout to be fact or truth. So Jesus is drinking a cup with his disciples, who are his bride, although they don't realise it, and he is reenacting one of the cups, and he says, never again will we do this, so have that cup of wine until I drink it with you in my Father's kingdom, which we all know when's happened. So forget the two other cups, just the two cups that Jesus is talking about. So when we talk about the Hebrew wedding and we parallel it with the festivals, there are spring stages and autumn stages, which are called that because the festivals happen in the spring or in the fall or the autumn. So the first stage is at the spring stage, they would have a cup of wine to celebrate the legal enactment and the validation of their marriage at the first stage, which we'll go into in detail at another time. And the second time they drink it, or the second cup that Jesus is referring to, that he's going to drink with his church in his Father's kingdom, is at the seventh stage as part of the celebration. So we looked at the procession for which is the beginning of the seventh stage. But this is the point. The two cups that Jesus is referring to is both in those stages. They're in the wedding. So between the cups, what happens? So actually what practically happens is this idea of preparation. To the point actually, and again, this would be bizarre and foreign and alien to us, but it's beautiful in the context of what we're talking about. The bride and the groom, after they've celebrated and they've had, so in a Hebrew wedding celebration, the marriage is arranged, it's agreed, it's kind of contractually written down and it's signed, and then whatever happens, which we'll look at, happens. So it goes to different people, different copies. The wedding, they're now legally married in the eyes of the law, in Jewish law. They have their cup of wine, and then literally they do not see each other until that next cup of wine, which is in the day of the wedding. Although the seventh stage, really, it's not the wedding. The wedding as we'd see it proper in a Western system. They don't see each other again until the day of the wedding. It's the procession. And again, the second cup, which Jesus is talking about here, is drunk again. So they share a cup of wine again in the wedding ceremony. So it's this idea between the two cups that they don't see each other. So again, we don't see that in the concept of never again drink the fruit of this vine until the day when I drink it with you in my Father's kingdom. So what it's alluding to, which Jesus isn't saying because he doesn't need to say, is the bride and the groom don't see each other. So what he's really saying to his disciples is, you're not going to see me again. This is it. Actually, this is a cup of wine, and you know what it symbolises? It symbolises our union, our partnership, salvation even. It symbolises a lot of things, but it's symbolised chiefly in the Jewish wedding, and it's also chiefly symbolised in Passover, or the Pesach, or Pesach, I can't remember what it's called now, off the top of my head. See, I don't know everything about Hebrew, but it's the same four cups. And then the bride and the groom go their own way, so they're legally married, but they're not. they're in the process of being married, but in the eyes of the law, they're legally married. So they have what I call all the benefits. So all the legal obligations of being married, but none of the relational benefits. So they don't live together because they don't actually see each other. So Jesus never sees his disciples again until he comes back for them in the second coming, and then that is finalised in echo of the same thing, that the Jewish wedding ceremony, by the marriage of the Lamb, in which they again share that cup. So actually, throughout what Jesus is saying, we're primarily not understanding this is wedding language. Secondly, we're not understanding Jesus actually, when he's talking and he's teaching and he's using that wedding language, he's going through the details of the wedding ceremony. And he's not just teaching it, he's practically acting it out. So this is key, and as we said before, it's his wedding. He's not teaching about his wedding, he's actually doing his wedding. Yeah? So again, flip switch. So, ironically, when we celebrate communion, we're remembering that. So we drink it again, but we just don't drink it again with him. Yeah? Don't drink it with him. And when we drink it together with him again, we'll be with Jesus in the Father's kingdom, in his Father and our Father's kingdom. So that's the process when we're joined in one flesh to him. And the process in between is preparation. So what the Hebrew wedding stages are teaching us is that there's preparation between. So this is the third of the 4 points. So Revelation 3:20, here I am standing at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and meet with that person and with me. Did you know this is wedding talk? So this was arranged between families. So again, it was an arrangement. It was an arrangement between families, not the couple. So again, we'll discuss the ramifications of that later. Well, just note our marriage is arranged. So later we'll go into Adam and Eve and find, actually, I've mentioned this before, and I'll probably mention it again. This is repeated all the way throughout Scripture. So the first wedding, although it doesn't say it's wedding, the first arrangement of a relationship in the Bible is when God creates Eve for Adam. And again, God arranges the marriage. So we see that repeated. The father arranges the marriage, not the bride or the groom. So this is a stage in a wedding, in the practical Jewish wedding. So this is the first stage. So the groom, so nothing's been arranged as of yet. Nothing's going on. So the groom and the father obviously have some kind of discussion. They decide they want the son, the father with the son, within the context of the wider family. So they decide together, decide as a family, in whatever way, that they want their son to marry this girl. So what they do is they go to the house where the bride-to-be, as they want her to be, lives with her father, and they knock on the door. And this begins everything. This is the beginning of all the 7 stages. So actually, by knocking on the door, it's a proposal and of a marriage. So what happens traditionally is, if that's rejected, the door simply isn't opened. It will be the bride's father who doesn't open the door. So it's like, no, we know what's going on here. So they know that it's a proposal or marriage. If they've decided they don't want their daughter to get married to that guy, they just simply don't open the door. By opening the door, the wedding ceremony begins in its own ways. So actually, it's kind of very legal, very detailed, very weird, but it's also very basic in part. So they simply open the door, they don't. So when Jesus is saying, here I am, stand at the door and knock, if anyone hears my voice, opens the door, I will come in and meet that person, they were me. That's what he's saying. Jesus is literally saying here in Revelation 3:20, I'm making a proposal of marriage with my Father to you. I stand at the door and knock. I'm waiting. So if anyone hears, they open the door. What happens? He will come in and eat that person. What happens practically in that when the door is opened by the bride to be and the father of the bride to be and the family of the bride to be? Well, it's formalised by them sitting down and having a meal together, which is where they had the first cup that we just talked about before. So it's literally the same process. So standing at the door and knock, it hears. So here they're practically hearing a knocking, or metaphorically hearing Jesus at the door, open the door, and they come in, discuss it, and then they sign a contract, which we'll discuss later, and they basically have a meal of celebration, which is a governmental meal with that cup of wine. So Jesus is simply stating that him and his father are initiating a marriage, but they're waiting for a response. So we talked about oil before. So Jesus is warning us, as of yet we haven't responded. So the placing of this within Revelation by John is critical. It's critical to what it's explaining. So what happens before there, and what happens after there, and then what happens to the earth in that process. So we kind of know what happens after, and we kind of know what's happened before. Partly, but not, you could say mostly, because we studied some of the other stages. But we know what's going to happen, the marriage of the Lamb. So in terms of the oil and the producing oil or buying oil and the rejection of Jesus, Jesus is simply saying, he's just simply stating, who's going to open for me and who's going to reject me? Let's begin this wedding. If you think about that in the context of what we're talking about theologically, that's quite something. Jesus said, let's begin the wedding. Because we'd assume that the wedding's already begun. We'd assume that we're virgins. We'd assume we're wise virgins, not foolish virgins. It's not necessarily so. So after this, we have the throne scene and then the seven seals, which we'll talk about later. It's like wedding language again. Then we have everything happens, what happens in Revelation, and then we have the perfected bride and the marriage of the Lamb. Again, wedding language. It's all wedding language. So point 4, between these two cups, preparation. So this is the years they don't see each other. So there's the wedding ceremony, the Hebrew wedding ceremony, or the ancient Hebrew, as they used to do. 7 stages, divided into first coming, second coming, or spring festivals, fall festivals, or autumn festivals. Between 2, time of preparation. This is when they don't see each other. And as his bride, talking about the bride of Christ, this is the season we're in. We are in the preparation season. You can really see in the whole context of everything we're talking about what the earth is going through and what it's been prepared for, and which leads to why. The big question: why this season? Why this madness? Why COVID? It somewhat answers the questions. It at least begins to, when actually I don't think anyone's really had an answer so far. Build Back Better is the political answer, or back to normal, when actually God's answer is, this is my preparing you through trials and tribulations, the crushing of the grapes, for what is to come. And if you don't want to be prepared for what's to come, you're rejecting me. And then if you don't reject me, the same thing happens to you that happens to the foolish virgins in the parable of the 10 virgins. It's basically what God's revealing at this point. And what's happening to the church practically in this season? We can't meet, or we haven't been able to meet. Even if we have, it's not the same. We meet with mores, we meet with rules and regulations. It's not free. The same thing happens the Jewish wedding ceremony. It's kind of emphasizing to me that Jesus, or even God himself, is emphasizing what we're kind of saying here. This is the season we're going through. It's the season of preparation, so what are we being prepared for? And the question's the same whether we put the wedding stuff into the analogy or we don't. So it's about, then, if it's preparation, it's preparation for two people, two different types of bride. One's for the bride and one's for the groom. So Jesus is our groom. So this is what he says. I don't think I've stated the verse, but I will whack it up in a quick flash slide or something. If not, it'll be in the description in the video. So certainly Gospels. Matthew, I'm going to guess. Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, will I have told you that I am going there to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. You know the way to the place where I am going. Thomas said to the Lord, Lord, we don't know where you're going, so how can we know the way? Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except from me, often quoted. If you really know me, you will know my Father as well. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. I think that's the end. Yeah. So this is the point. This is the groom's preparation, what Jesus is describing here. So let's go back to it before we. So this house that has many rooms. So wedding language, as we've said, and it has to be consistently, Jesus is highlighting this language. He's talking about a wedding, but he's not just talking about a wedding, he's talking about his wedding. What happens at a wedding? What happens is the groom's preparation was to go and build a kind of annex or an extension to his father's house, and that's excuse me, just a massive sneeze. Maybe that was well timed, maybe not. Kaboom. So this is the last of our four kabooms. So he goes to build an extension to his father's house, which is the one flesh couple bridal bedroom where they basically have sex in, and that's where they live. So the preparation for the groom is to prepare himself by building that room and preparing that place for his bride so they can be in it. So Jesus is using the same analogy. So this is what happens at a wedding, this is my wedding. So in Jesus' analogy of a wedding to his wedding, he is basically going to prepare a place for us all in his Father's house. So corporately then we all get married to Jesus, if you want to use that language. So that's a bit crass and a bit too flowery, let's say. But that's the reality of it. So it's interesting to see this I am the way, the truth, and the life is actually stated within the context of the wedding language within Jesus talking about his wedding. So what's that way, what's that truth, and what's that life? I will not answer that question. I will leave that to you. So I think I've just gone through most of this. So the bride's role, again, is to build a chamber for him. It's no harm to go through again. So it's their wedding chamber, their room. It's connected to his father's. They will live in that house. The room is that bedroom, and in that room they consummate their marriage, which is some proof of the virginity stage we'll look at later. Which is probably the most bizarre thing, but again reflects what we're talking about. So marriage then is a reflection of the bigger picture, which is Jesus' wedding. So the question, the real big, deep question is, was the wedding ceremony and relationships created as a picture for Jesus and his bride, or the bridegroom and the bride? Or is Jesus just using that imagery? Clearly he's not just using it, because he's using it and then talking about his wedding. So in a way, what he's saying is, marriage was created for me, and God created it for his divine purposes, to basically describe the purpose of the world, to not only were we created to be in relationship and union with God, but as a type of bride, as a shadow. It's a shadow of things to come, as Paul would say. So if we ask these questions about why certain things are the way they are in human marriage, in practical marriage. So one of them is, why is sex exclusive only with marriage? This is the reason. Because it's symbolic of the fact that we are exclusive for him. And that's not ever thinking why. So there are issues of relationship within the bride and groom relationship, but also the symbolism of our exclusiveness to Jesus in our bride and groom relationship in the bridal paradigm. So it's a difficult question to answer why sex is to be this way, but this is why. So it's not only symbolic of by being married and practicing that we learn what marriage and preparation within a marriage actually means. So in that culture, sex outside that marriage is off limits. So and it's off limits by punishment. So you could say it's not really off limits, but yeah, it's punishable, and by death for a woman. So we are off limits, as is bride and groom. That asks us a bigger question than simply, are we buying oil? What we're prepared to go through to buy that oil, in terms of pressing of the grapes and pain and suffering and tribulations. It goes to the point of, are we off limits? Do the way we live our lives off limits? And if you go back to the handshake between the church understanding who she is and understanding what's going on in the world, clearly the world's value system is like, actually Jesus is the one off limits for them. So again, the punishment for breaking out within our culture is severe. This is actually written in the Torah, which we'll look at later, because it covers other stuff. It's just not about death as well, but monetary sacrifice. We'll cover the whole gambit, which is why we shouldn't ignore this stuff in the Bible. We will look at it later in detail. But like, just think. So we've uncovered 3 really important things from the whole teaching. So this is why this stuff's really, really important to who we are. Because even if we don't get that, even if we don't buy into the imagery, even if we never want to call ourselves a bride or consider ourselves a bride, then what's it actually teaching? It's teaching need to buy oil, primarily. The within that need, we're going to be. I mean, there's various biblical examples. So one is the crushing of the grapes, another is silver in the furnace, and the other is gold refined in the fire. So will we go through those processes to become who we are meant to become? But the final ultimate point is, how off limits are we? Do we live our life like we're off limits? Because there's this idea that's crept into the church, which we're not even going to discuss here, of that the cross has said it all, which it has. I'm not saying that's not true, because obviously it's in the Word, it's true. Obviously this is in the Word, and this is true as well. But that's it. And is the problem in the church at the moment to do with the fact that in the nation, I think you see this if you evaluate what's going on in the nation, what's going on in the church. So obviously Gresham in the UK. So the question then for me, might not be for you, is the church in the UK off limits to everything else? Jesus. And then do we individually, not corporately, live our lives like we're off limits? That's the question. And I think what I see is that too many of us, that's the polite way to put it, are living our lives like what Jesus did for us on the cross, our lives are a religious, law-orientated interaction between turning up for church 1 day a week, 2 hours a week, and then doing what we want for the rest of it. That doesn't mean we're necessarily debauching around, having sex with whoever we want, or getting drunk, or doing whatever we want. It just means we're doing what we want. That ultimately is off limits in a relationship, in a marriage relationship. We do what we want. So actually, going back to something, so this whole idea of marriage, how do we really understand practically, not just theologically, but really get to grips with what it's like to be in a marriage relationship? Well, we're married. We strive in a marriage to live as one flesh. We strive to love, but what does love mean? Love means putting someone else's interests before your own, even if it involves your own suffering. The opposite of love is I get an emotional response in my body because of someone, and if they're not giving me that emotional response, then I don't love them. So we learn about trials and tribulations and the pressing of the grapes, or the refining of the fire, however you want to put it, and buying oil by sacrificing in our relationship because of love. This is why Paul said the first thing is love. It's the only thing that matters. So it's teaching us what love is, the value of love, and what that practically means. So going back to my previous point about how we're living in this season. Are we living like we're off limits? So what is the point of, what is God saying in the pandemic and in this season? We're not just talking about the pandemic, but pandemic is key to understanding this season. What's happening in our lives when we're calm? So what I said before is, God's become an idol, has become a religion for 2 hours a week to make us feel better so we can do whatever we want because the cross has said it all. So what am I then saying? So let's put out an alternative. So the alternative is this. Are we right in saying that Jesus died for our sins and that's the only thing that can save us? And that we're saved by grace? Yes. But, and this is the question I'm asking of you, is that it, or does that propel us into something? And the point of all this is, surely it propels us into this relationship with God where we are off limits. So what we're doing in that 2 hours a week on a Sunday, which is a religious act to make ourselves feel better, which is an exchange really, it's an invisible exchange. So we pay what is a religious duty and observance to something, whatever it is, and then we can basically do what we want the rest of the time. That's the invisible exchange. And my kind of proof of what I'm saying is there's got to be more to it, so it propels us into something, including being off limits. So if we're off limits, we can't do that. In this season, we're being taught that because actually, and I think I would go as far to say this, God has actually made it in this season in the UK, not in other churches, but other churches in other nations have the same thing, which is why it's a nation question. Which is why I'm asking, in the church in the UK, what's the state of off-limitness to idols, basically? And that's a sin of adultery, basically. It's a sin of idol. And actually, this is going off the point, but when we talk about homosexuality and all the other stuff that surrounds it, that everyone else wants to talk about it, it's the same answer as being exclusive. Sexually, in a marriage, is that if marriage reflects our relationship with God, if we're in a same-sex relationship, then the idol in that relationship has to be the other person. So when we're making that one fleshness, that other person is the same as us. It's basically us. It's a reflection of us. It's not God. Anyway, going back, so this would be my reasoning. We're getting a bit deep here. Sorry, but I'm totally not sorry. And the reason to challenge you is to not challenge you. It's like we're seeking truth, however hard. If it's challenging, it's challenging. I'll quite equally talk about stuff that isn't challenging just because it's truth. So we're talking about truth. Where is challenging or not is irrelevant. So I think God's made it in this season that the church can't practically meet because, for one, we don't meet for the right reasons, which is a oneness and one flesh with Jesus, and we're off limits. That's what profound mystery means. This is the profound mystery. The profound mystery in what we're going through in this season is like, well, practically who we're married to is our relationship with Jesus just contractual? Is it religious, or is there something more to it, which is to propel us into something? So another point is, do we look like we're propelled into something, or do we look like we just can't cope in the season for whatever reason? I think we look like the latter. Thirdly, I also think, because I think to be in all truth, we're dealing with truth here, if you ask the question about the priority of the church, well, church is not about people, it's not about buildings, and it's not about programs. But yet, I think we've been shown that that's a lie, actually, and the church is about programs, and it's about buildings, and it's not about people. Because when, in the season when we've had buildings taken away and programs taken away from us, I mean, simply look what we've become. Look what's happened. So anyway, that's a divergence, but really that's the things we need to be discussing in the season when we're looking at this sort of thing in the Hebrew marriage and the stage of preparation, which is like bang in the middle. So the context here, remember, Jesus is at the Last Supper, has told us to his disciples he will die, he will go away. So his disciples' response to him, I mean, they clearly would have understood the wedding talk, so don't really understand what Jesus is doing. So the act of sharing in that cup is sharing in his suffering, because the cup symbolises two things, really. At the end of the day, we looked at what it means, but it's 5 things. But the key things are his sacrifice on the cross, which is blood. The union we have by him doing that practically and celebrating that cup in a kind of metaphysical way, if you want to use big language. And they didn't understand what he was saying. So we won't be the first people to not understand what Jesus is saying. It's a precedent there. So this is the bride's preparation. So this is the same part, but it's our preparation for him. So can never go on about this too much in what Jesus is saying. So he's talking about a wedding, but he's talking about his wedding. Our preparation is for him. Just kind of labelled on that. So the bride's role is to prepare herself. Traditionally, the whiter a bride was, the better, because it's established. You've not been outside, you've been indoors preparing yourself for your wedding, and for not just a wedding. I mean, it's the funny thing about marriage. Marriage isn't a day, it's a lifetime. So she was actually preparing herself for practically being married. And as practically she goes about, she wears a veil. This is where the veil comes from. So the point of the veil is, probably we miss some of that, but primarily it's what's obvious. It's like, I am set apart, I am in the process of being married, I'm preparing myself all you guys looking at me, you can't see me because I'm off limits. That's what this veil's about. It's a Song of Songs that talks about this veil. Why should I be a veil? Or why should I? Like, you can read it for yourself. It's later down. But this is in the Song of Songs from chapter 1, verse 5 and 6. So she's talking about this preparation. So again, we clearly miss this. Dark and mighty yet lovely, daughters of Jerusalem. So the daughters of Jerusalem, like they were friends of the bridegroom, they were friends of the bride. She's talking about her own kind of social and relational. So dark like the tents of Kedar. So the Bedouins who live in the desert, who still live in the desert, have black tents. So that's the picture. Like the tent curtains of Solomon. So they were dark too, mainly because there's not any light there. Do not stare at me because I am dark, because I am darkened by the sun. That's key in the context. My mother's sons were angry with me and made me take care of the vineyards. My own vineyard I had to neglect. So we've already gone through what vineyards, vines, blood, wine represents. So simply she's saying in this stage, without saying it, because we don't understand it, but now we do, what she's saying is, I've not prepared myself properly as a bride. I've not been indoors, and that's one dark. Practically, she's been darkened by the sun, so she's either burnt or she's tanned. She's actually been working. So we talked about before the wine and the crushing of the wine. The process produces fruit, which produces wine. So she's actually been put out by brothers. So in context, if we're looking at the church, we're saying those brothers are people within the church. So people in the church, people in the community have, so her brothers, her near relations, have made her work in the vineyard. I think we do that way too much with people in the church, particularly new Christians. We make them work. We don't allow them to prepare themselves for what they should be preparing themselves for. It's the same thing. Same problem always. It's repetitive, which we discussed earlier. She's clearly not been wearing a veil. She's clearly not been indoors. She's clearly been doing what she shouldn't have been doing, which was working in her brother's vineyards. So she's clearly not prepared. And that's her final step. My own vineyard, so her own preparation, her own crushing of the grapes, her own process of preparation in terms of trials and tribulations, she's neglected. So this is kind of her confession. I mean, Song of Songs is something else. So that I've just said that. So those are the notes there. She's distracted. She's not prepared. So what I haven't mentioned, she's preparing not for the event, which we said before. The bride is preparing for a relationship. Yeah? The wedding day really doesn't matter. It's just symbolic of what it's symbolic of, but it's all about the relationship. So at this stage, so it's between what we call the spring and the fall processes, particularly in relation to the festivals, which again we'll look at later. So the contract's been drawn up, and it's legal. She's legally obligated. So she's no longer really in that community a pure and chastised virgin, certainly in the context of not dating, not having relationships, not being set apart for someone else, because she now is. So again, relationally and practically, she's preparing herself, and she's inside because that's done inside, because it's the house. She's preparing to basically mother a house, which is a big thing biblically. So the man's the head of the house. Well, that's not quite correct in that tradition. So if you find out who owns the house, the woman owns the house. The man leads the house, the woman owns the house, the woman runs the house. To coin a Jewish phrase, the idea is the man starts and the woman finishes. So the man builds the house, practically, we see that, and then the woman or the wife carries out the other duties of the house, which make the house work. So this is this one flesh idea. It's not about headship, it's about the idea a woman and man have two different identities, and they each contribute to the whole house. Without both, there is no house. So it's simply preparation, and that's what this phase is all about. So we've come to the end of our 1 stage, 2 stage. So we've got part 1, part B, part 1A, part 1B, or part 1, 1.1, 1.2. So this is what we've come to. So the 7th stage, it's spring or fall. So what we find out as well is what these Jewish festivals are looking forward to, which is basically Jesus is not just echoed with the wedding ceremony, the 7 stages. Jesus actually did them, but on the day the same day they're celebrated. So Jesus died on Passover. So we're beginning to unravel all this. So I'm not even sure I've got this right, but we've now got 4 of the 7 stages we've covered. So we've covered the preparation, which we've just done, the procession, which is in the parable of the 10 virgins, the wedding feast, which we covered slightly, and the consummation, which we've covered slightly, and we've also, stage 1, we've done the knocking on the door bit. So we've covered 4 parts, and we've looked or alluded to the other 3 or other parts of the process within the process. Because in reality, there are in some of these multi-parts to the different stages, to the 7 stages. So by the time we finish this, we'll have a full outline and it'll be properly laid out. But we haven't really looked at what we've looked at compared to the whole. This would be this table. So literally 7 stages. We've looked at the 4 critical elements of the 7 stages as reiterated by Jesus in the Gospels, and there's that bit in Revelation, and we've kind of journeyed into other bits and started to discuss them, or have alluded to discussing them. That's it. That's the end of it. So what do we take from the 2 videos? So this is the end of part 1. This is the conclusion, and what we're going to look at in part 2. So we've gone to see that this is bridal power run is foundational Jewish scripture. I apologise for my appalling spelling. I really don't think it matters, which is why I don't really care. But then again, I will correct it. So there'll be slides somewhere online for this. So it is important. We've looked at 4 critical stages which highlight how important it is, and we've gone into some of the bits and details. So it's a revelation. It's his wedding. So in that, also theologically, Jesus doesn't teach the bridal identity. He simply states that he is the groom in the story, as well as it being about his wedding. So in part 2, so the 3rd video, so we've done part 1A and part 1B, the 4 stages. We'll run through the other 4 stages, 3 stages. Typo again. We'll run through the Jewish festivals, which are called the Moedim. So again, that makes it a triangular paradigm. We're just not comparing Jesus' wedding to a Jewish wedding, but we're comparing also both to the festivals. And we'll add some more flesh to bones, which will probably be continued in part 3. put out there all the whole Jewishness of the whole thing. So we've gone part way with the Jewishness, but just looking at it, because obviously, as we said at the beginning, it's alien. We can go further. Look forward to speaking to you in part 2, considering this is part 1B. As I said at the beginning of this all, do what you want with it. So it's all laid out. Have a think about it, go away, think about it, look up the verses, go and find out what you want. It is hard to find out stuff. I will say that. And just discuss it. If you want to discuss it and take that as far as you want to, then feel free. That's part of the point of this. That we not only begin to look at truth, but begin to really analyse it in detail and involve friends and family and other Christians in this and discuss it with them if you want.